Good morning and welcome to the AAA Automotive Conversation. I am Robert Sinclair Jr., Manager of Media Relations for AAA Northeast, and we thank you for joining us. Recent news stories have reported on incidents of hacking of the social media accounts of some prominent persons. Bank accounts have been raided, computer networks of big companies, and even the government have been infiltrated by hackers. And we've heard about malware being put on computers and cell phones, rendering them useless or demanding money so people can regain use of their devices. Now, many may not know it, but these things can happen to your car or truck as well. Joining us to discuss the phenomenon of vehicle hacking is Justin Cappos. He's the Associate Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at the NYU Tandon School of Engineering. Thank you for joining us, Justin.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we have to make a note that we only have audio from Justin because if anyone should know about the potential problems of downloading software of a particular program, it is he, and he has decided not to use the software that we're using for fear of damage to his very valuable computer. So Justin, being the gentleman with the bona fides, with the credits that he has, we certainly understand and appreciate that. And Justin, we all know about computers made by Apple, Dell, and HP, but car companies produce computers, and from what I've read, the numbers often exceed the numbers produced by the well-known computer makers. What do computers on modern vehicles do?
Yes, so a modern car might have 80 or more computers in it. Even luxury vehicles will have over 100. And those computers will do really just about everything you think about in a vehicle. They'll do things like when you push that little button on the overhead thing and it turns the light on in your vehicle, there's a little microcontroller inside there. If you have certain types of power locks, or you want to control the windows, have the windows go up and down, there's a microcontroller inside of there. If you want to engage your brakes, or deal with certain aspects of corrective steering and other things, there are computers there. So really, the kind of idea that the automakers are there bending steel and forming the physical parts that make the car isn't as accurate anymore as thinking about them as writing computer software and doing things like that happen to be used as part of a car.
Now, we have some photos of some of these components, I believe, and if we can get those up, we'll scroll through some of them. Very interesting. Interesting that you mentioned that something as simple as mundane as a window controller can be, has a computer in it. Now, this is, I don't have the caption. This looks like, if I remember properly, something from the brakes. If we can go through there, that's one of those basic connectors. That's a point of vulnerability, some other connector. Yeah, various components here. It looks like some sort of actuator. We know what that is. That's an instrument panel. But all these device, instrument panel, and associated hardware, we all know that these things are there and they have computers, and that from time to time they have to get updates. So what are the updates that have to be put into some of these devices, and how do these devices receive the updates?
Right. So one of the big dangers and kind of problems of automotive networks is that basically once you get on the network, if you're able to compromise a device in some way, shape, or form, and exploit a problem in it, then there isn't an enormous amount of security on automotive networks or with automotive components. So an attacker, like when you think about it, there's this notion in hacking about moving laterally, and what that means is that, let's say that you're able to go and break into one computer in one area. Moving laterally is then your ability to use that access to that one computer to move and attack other and compromise other computers throughout the organization or the infrastructure. And so in a vehicle, the real problem is, one of the big problems is it's very easy to move laterally and do a lot of damage inside of a vehicle. So you may say, well, who really cares, if an attacker is able to go and take control of like the dome light, if they find a vulnerability in the dome light in my vehicle, why does that matter? Well, it matters if they can do things like interfere with your brakes, and because they have found that vulnerability. And so it's absolutely critical that all of these types of components in your vehicle are able to get updates. And even more important than the fact that they can get updates is the fact that they can get updates securely. Because if an attacker can go and as part of an update, they can go and provide you with, like software of their own, then the attacker can do absolutely anything to, that component is physically, like is permitted to do. If the attacker is able to load their own software onto the component. And so that's really the key, is you need to be able to protect updates. And making it even worse, when you think about who you need to protect it against, we have seen extremely effective attacks used by nation state actors, where a major government will go and attack another major organization. Like we saw allegedly North Korea do with South Korea and do with attacking Sony and others like that. We've seen that. We've seen Russia allegedly go after and attack Ukraine and others like this. We've seen allegedly the US and Israel go and hit the centrifuges of Iran. And these mechanisms that people use to do these attacks were all based on issues related to software updates and software updaters. And so when a car company wants to go and protect, they need to think about, how do we protect against the best hackers in the world, which are those people who are at those nation states.
Now, I remember the infotainment system of a particular company's vehicles had some problems when it was first introduced. I won't mention the name of the company, but those systems had to get computer software updates. Did somebody have to drive to the dealer and the vehicle be plugged in for those updates to happen?
So the way it's done today can vary quite a bit by vehicle. In some cases, you do have to go into the dealer. In some cases, a dealer might send you a USB key or something like that, that you would go and effectively plug in. Which, by the way, you should think about that. That's scary, that they can send you something that you just plug in, because people plug all sorts of things in, like insurance dongles and all this other stuff in their vehicle. And by the way, those have also in some cases had major security problems and could have let attackers do things like control brakes in your car and other stuff like that. And then the third way, which is I think the way that everybody realizes that the industry needs to go, is over-the-air updates. And over-the-air updates are very much the future, but if we don't do them right, if we do them the way that they've like historically been done by the companies in the in like the mobile space and others that have tried to do this, it's just a huge security incident waiting to happen that's going to cost thousands of lives. And I can't even imagine what the lawsuits would do, but I'm sure they're going to bankrupt just about every company in that supply chain. So it's a ticking time bomb waiting to happen, is having these insecure updaters that unfortunately are fairly common.
This brings a couple of questions to mind. You talk about nation states and what some of them have done. Is it potentially, let's say, a tool of terrorists? Could the right nation state with the right gear, say, disable all the trucks in the United States of America, rendering our economy is suffering as a result of COVID? Imagine none of the trucks are able to drive, or whatever things they might be able to do to a vehicle. Is that some way that a nation state could, in essence, perform a terrorist attack against us.
Absolutely. That's actually one of the main concerns that the Department of Homeland Security has had, because it wouldn't be very difficult for an attacker to go and disable all the police cars or ambulances or other things like this. And as you point out, that could just cause massive, massive problems. Or even if it's not disabling them, which, by the way, disabling them is very easy once you get access. But if they go a little bit further and do things like imagine that after a police car has been running for a certain amount of time, the brakes just go. Like the brakes will no longer engage, or the steering is effectively locked. You can just imagine the damage and chaos that this is going to cause. So it really is just a disaster waiting to happen. And the thing that's in some ways the scariest about all this is right now you need to be, I think, like quite a good hacker to do these things. We have seen groups from China hack Teslas. We've seen researchers from NYU and University of California, San Diego, and University of Washington go and hack various U.S. vehicles. We've seen a half dozen of these different groups go and hack various vehicles and show just how easy it is to do it. And the thing is that it's really only going to get easier to do this over time. And once it reaches the level where the average cyber criminal who's going and writing ransomware and doing all those sorts of low-level attacks is able to do that, you do not want ransomware in your vehicle telling you better find a way to feed them, to send them Bitcoin while you're driving down the highway, or else they're going to disable your brakes. That's not a world we want to live in. So we need to drastically improve security and drastically improve the way we do updates. And to their credit, a lot of the automakers have been working to improve security, but if they do this without improving the way that they deliver updates, this becomes a huge potential Trojan horse for attackers to use.
Now, I know you're working on efforts to prevent that, but we have a question from a viewer. You mentioned Chinese hack of Tesla, and the question is: last year, a Tesla was hacked, and Elon Musk said, "Nice work." Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think that's actually very much the right approach. In really almost all of the security community, the best practice to do is to have designs and systems be open for people to try to break. And then what happens is that if they break the system, you give them some sort of reward or recognition or notoriety that's like kind of the currency that people use in the hacker community. And then you fix the problems. And ideally, you not only fix the problems, but if there's a design you could do that would make it so the problem couldn't have occurred, you change, you move to that design. And so really what I completely agree with what Elon Musk and this, by the way, we call these bug bounties. A lot of the major tech companies have these, Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, you name it, basically all have these things where if you find a problem, you give it to us and we pay you for it. Now, here's an interesting thing to know about this, which is that this works quite well, but isn't perfect. And one of the reasons why it's not perfect is because Google might pay you, let's say, $100,000 for a serious vulnerability that you find in Chrome, but you could go sell that vulnerability on the black market for $500,000 because governments and nation-state actors want to use that vulnerability to go and attack, dissidents or people who they want to spy on, or use it for, stealing industrial secrets or other things. So you have to do this in a way where it's effective. But this idea of having, promoting people to try to find flaws in systems is really essential to getting good security. And it's one of the biggest problems that, I mean, it's sort of widely known internally in the industry that the updaters provided that are closed source by a lot of these companies are wildly insecure, and they're really dangerous for people to use. But the problem is that since the designs aren't open, it's hard for experts to be able to publicly talk about why that's the case, because maybe they received information only under NDA or other things that they can't do, so that they can't, go and say, this is the reason why it's bad. We can just sort of say, hey, don't drink the water in this little town in Michigan, but we can't say why. And so having open designs is absolutely critical if your goal is to secure systems, which really means saving lives in this case.
I'm a little surprised, because I would have thought the reaction would have been that, Elon Musk was being very arrogant and showing a lot of hubris, but he's actually congratulating people because that's something that they are courting. They want to see the vulnerabilities in their system. Now, you mentioned over-the-air updates. How do those updates happen? You have modern vehicles and they have connections to the outside world through Bluetooth and GPS and what have you. How are those updates coming from the manufacturer and going into my new, XYZ mobile to make sure that the infotainment system works properly?
Right. So typically what happens is there's some device on the vehicle that is responsible for going and being able to retrieve updates, and then it can distribute those updates to other devices on the vehicle. And so the infotainment unit is, since it's a fairly well-powered device and has usually a pretty good network connection, that tends to be the device that is that kind of ingress point, that point where you take updates in. And so what happens is that often that device will take the updates and then it will distribute the updates to the different other devices on the vehicle. And so obviously a big concern you have is that, well, what if my infotainment unit gets hacked? What can it do? And so any design that wants to be secure against a nation state actor, or even just a competent, hacker, which should be every design. I mean, if you're going to trust your life on it, getting into that vehicle, it should be every design. Those systems need to have protection so that even if that party is hacked, there can't be any damage that's done to the computers in the vehicle or the occupants of the vehicle, more importantly. And so typically it'll download updates and then send them out to the brakes to deal with steering, deal with whatever else in the vehicle needs to be updated.
You talked about some of the things that can happen, disabling the brakes or the steering. I had no idea you could disable the steering, but I guess a lot of them are electromechanical systems. Used to be a direct shaft link to, say, a rack and pinion system at the front of the vehicle to move the wheels, but now we know that there are servos and motors and what have you that connect the steering wheel to an electric motor that's powering those things. But you are working, and talk about what you're doing to try and fight these things. You're working with a number of organizations who have created a system to try to prevent all this from happening with funding from the government. Who are you working with, and what exactly are you doing? What do you call it? It's got a unique name.
Yeah. Okay, so first off, let me say, I think you can disable the power steering, which effectively for many vehicles makes it, or lock the steering column, which effectively makes it so you can't steer. I'm not aware of you being able to actually turn the wheel left or right necessarily.
Okay.
But let me answer your question. So we're building an over-the-air. We built an open over-the-air update standard called Uptane. And Uptane is something where the Department of Homeland Security came and reached out to me. Someone there reached out to me maybe 5 or so years ago and said, hey, the automotive industry has a real problem with updates. And they know they have a real problem because the things that are being done in the industry, derive effectively from these very insecure systems that unfortunately are, because of the timeline it takes to replace things in the automotive industry, are in many cases still being used today. And a lot of the automakers realize that they need to phase out, this like existing systems. And so rather than having some, new company come in and claim that they have a secure system and, whatever. That's just not the way that security systems are usually done in the tech space. In the tech space, if you have a system that is security focused, usually what you do is you have an open design and you make it so anybody can see it and try to break it and try to hack it. That's how they do all the cryptographic algorithms you hear about. You hear about SHA or AES or whatever, all the things next to when you click on the lock icon on your browser that shows you things about the website you're communicating with. Those algorithms have all been reviewed by any cryptographic expert who wants to look at them. They're all publicly available and have gone through multiple rounds of very serious, very detailed attack. And that's one reason why we, the general community has high degree of confidence that those algorithms are secure, is because they've been through a massive amount of scrutiny by the best experts in the world. And so we went and we did exactly that same thing with Optane, which is the name of our system. We brought in experts from automotive across a huge number of different OEMs, vendors. We brought in experts who, like Andre Weimerskirch, who has helped to design a lot of the standards and had done a lot with like connected car security and other things like this. And we took our expertise, which is mostly in security software updates, which we've done across a lot of different domains in the cloud, Linux, package managers, and also major companies use secure update systems that were designed by myself and my students. And so we all work together as an open community to design this free standard that has multiple open source free to use implementations out there, and also has a bunch of if you want to pay a vendor to build custom implementations, has a bunch of different excellent vendors that are out there that will very happily sell you Optane implementations if you want to purchase one instead. But it's it's a completely free, secure thing that unless you go and buy a copy of it from from a vendor who's selling you support, I and everybody else in the project, we make $0 off of any of this. Our goal here is not to like pad our own bank accounts or do other things like that. Our goal is to save lives. And if we don't get secure systems for updating vehicles into vehicles, we're just, we're living on borrowed time. There's going to be a massive disaster that may make things like 9/11 look like a much more minor event.
Wow, very ominous. You are working with other companies using this type of software. It's not just for vehicles. Aren't you working with Apple and Amazon and Google on efforts for them to try and make their network secure?
Yes, the design that we're using in automotive is based fairly heavily on a design that is effectively the standard in the cloud. It's a project called TUF, T-U-F. It's hosted by the Linux Foundation, which in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is like the organization that has all of the major cloud standards. So Kubernetes and like Containerd and all these other things are all hosted under there. And we are one of only a handful of projects that's reached the highest level of maturity, which means we're effectively, important and pervasively used throughout the infrastructure there. And, there's implementations that have been done by Amazon, by Google, by Docker, by dozens of other major companies. And then, we're widely used across, a huge number of different major cloud vendors. Pretty much any cloud vendor you name, you can find out details about how they use TUF and in their infrastructure. And so we're bringing that same protection to the automotive space with Optane.
Sure. What's different about what you're doing and the efforts, other anti-hacking efforts by different, I guess, web-based companies that are out there?
Yeah, one of the big differences is that our system assumes that an attacker might be able to compromise different aspects of the system. So if an attacker breaks into most of those types of security systems, then it's game over. They basically can do what they want. And so you kind of have this, we put all of our eggs in one basket approach. Optane is designed so that an attacker not only has to break in, but they have to break in simultaneously multiple places in multiple different ways and bypass many layers of protection in order to be able to do any real damage. And it also gives ways where if an attacker breaks into one thing but isn't able to get all the way in, that you can securely recover from the damage that they cause. It limits the damage and recovers from it. So, we learned a long time ago that when you build ships, you don't want to have it that one hole in the side of the boat means that the whole boat sinks.
Yeah, double hulls.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You do double hulls, you compartmentalize, you do other things like this in order to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And, really everybody is, if you're using these other systems, you may have a big ship that has a lot of people on it, but, you hit one iceberg and make one tiny little hole and you're toast.
Right. You mentioned earlier, we have a question that talked about, you mentioned earlier, insecure systems on older vehicles. The used car market is huge. How will systems in used cars be secured? I guess we have to determine what we mean by old. How old a vehicle must a vehicle be in order to be able to be vulnerable to these hack attacks, and how can we make them more secure?
Right. Well, I have a completely hack-proof vehicle. I have a 1977 Corvette, and there's no
Okay.
computers anywhere in that.
Okay.
When the more modern vehicles, the vehicles that are around like the 2008, 2010 timeframe have a fair number of computers in them.
Mm-hmm.
They may have 20, 30 things in there that are computerized, and they're not necessarily getting updates now. And this is a very complicated situation because effectively the OEMs and others would have to commit to going back and in many cases even replacing hardware because the hardware that they installed in those devices is so weak that it can't necessarily do all the things that would be needed to like have all the modern security protections that we know are needed. Excuse me. So it's a difficult situation. I think that there would definitely be value in finding ways to protect older cars, but I think the main priority that the automakers have now is how do we build new cars that are secure. And to be honest, the industry has moved forward tremendously on that front. And I think once they have that under control, then I think maybe they will be more willing to spend and pay attention to what to do with these older vehicles.
So going forward, if all the new cars are secured, so every car, let's say from this year forward, will be secured. I've got that, it was 2008 to 2010 that were particularly vulnerable. Do they have the point of ingress that the modern vehicle has, that infotainment system? And as such, should an owner of those years' vehicles be a lot less worried?
Well, so let me also just say that security, you're never ever actually secure. You're just more secure.
Okay.
So think about it as safety. You'd never say there's a vehicle where you could never you could never get in an accident that would cause you harm. You can just make it more and more safe. So a modern vehicle is much safer than my old Corvette, which doesn't have airbags or a lot of the other safety systems that modern vehicles do. Mm-hmm. Okay. So just along the same way, your modern vehicles are getting more and more secure as you're moving towards this. And so if your main concern is vulnerability against cyber attack, which should be a concern, certainly, but possibly not your main concern, then you should be perhaps worried about that. But I am, I think, more likely to die in an automotive accident, than I am a cyber attack, especially given how rarely I drive my vehicle. Living in New York, it doesn't happen. And of course, I'm many orders of magnitude more likely to get killed crossing the street. But yeah.
I have to digress for a moment because you mentioned you have a 77 Corvette. I was going to school in Washington, D.C. in 1977. I went to a Chevy dealer and somehow talked my way into test driving a 77 Corvette. I took that thing up on campus. Boy, I was big man on campus. And I wonder if yours was an automatic or a stick, and do you have the slotted wheels that were very popular in that year?
It is an automatic, which wouldn't have been my first choice, but I had a Capri, which is effectively a Mustang clone. That was a manual, and I liked the variety.
Did you have the V8 in the Capri?
I did, yeah.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, it could. Both of them were good. Like the Capri, I unfortunately got rid of. 2 cars is really too many when you live in New York. But yeah, they're both fun vehicles.
Well, the question becomes, how can somebody protect themselves outside of having a 77 Corvette, or I remember my mother's 72 Pinto. What can you do? Like, I guess what you said already answers that question. You can never be totally secure. You can be more secure. What can we do to make ourselves more secure?
So if you're just a normal consumer, I in general would be a little hesitant to connect phones or other devices to your vehicle. That's yet another way that attackers could potentially get access to vehicular networks.
The same with the little renting a car, and they download sync the vehicle with Bluetooth to a rental car.
Yeah, exactly. When you go and you sync your vehicle in that way, you often leave all sorts of contact information, like people phone numbers and stuff like that, and all sorts of potentially private information about you that you probably don't even realize you're doing. So that's one reason to do it, but it could, potentially in the case of an attack, be a vector for people to get in. Just like part of the reason why I didn't install that software in order to participate in this call was, I don't want to add another vector where someone could go and get onto my machine using potentially insecure software like that. When I have, when I do things like I use hardware tokens on this device to sign software or do other things like that. So it's about sort of minimizing your risk. Now, if you have a car you drive all the time, you need you really feel like you benefit tremendously from syncing your phone with it and being able to use it in that way, then I totally get it. But I would think about it like, you're taking risk as you do those types of actions. And, if you're doing it to every vehicle you step in, you're taking a lot of risk and spreading your information around a lot of places potentially. If you're, doing it just with one vehicle, then that's a much safer way to go. The other thing I'd say is that if you're in the more of the industry side where you work at an automaker or you have in-depth knowledge, absolutely you really need to be focusing on using open standards, things like really like Optane to do updates, because there is a big wave coming of attacks in this area. And certainly, by now, no one is going to be able to plausibly claim in court, whether that's an actual court or the court of public opinion, that they weren't warned. So the government wants to protect you and the people in your vehicles, and please take the minimum steps you need to do this yourself as well. And our community is very open. We have like, I don't know, 50 or so people from all across the automotive industry and everywhere else pretty much every OEM you can think of and every major vendor participating. So, please, feel free to reach out and potentially join our community if you're in that industry and interested.
How can someone get in touch with you? If either I'm a vehicle owner and I want to get the latest Optane updates, or I'm in the industry and want to contact you, how can we go about doing that? And I bet you've got a very secure email address.
Well, email is one of these things that anybody has to be able to reach you. So I do use an NYU email address that is a fairly good way, although that's not the only way to reach me. You can get my GPG key and sign messages if you need to communicate with me privately. But one of the best ways, if you're just a general automotive enthusiast and want information, is to go to the Optane website. And so if you go to the Optane website, this will give you information on what's going on with the project. If you're someone in the automotive industry and you want to participate, you can either reach out directly or like via email, and we can add you to a mailing list for this, and you can join calls and things like that. Or you can go to the Optane website and find out more information about how to join as well there.
The Optane website, is it optane.com?
No, it's you can do optane.github.io, or you can just type Optane into Google, and any of the top, bunch of links will take you there. I think Optane, let me double check this before I say this wrong. Also, if you do optane.org, it will also send you to the site. So you can get there a whole bunch of different ways.
And Optane is spelled Uptane, like
yes,
octane, measurement of gasoline's resistance to burning. One last thing I wanted to ask you about that your efforts have been recognized and awarded. You won an award. Can you tell us about that?
The Popular Science.
Yes.
Oh, great. Yes. So Optane was recognized by Popular Science as one of the greatest technological innovations of, I think, 2018. I could be wrong on the year here. And actually, for my prior work on securing the updaters that are used across like smartphones and cloud devices and laptops and desktops and other things like that, I also was recognized as one of their Popular Science's brilliant 10 researchers under 40 years old in, I think, 2013.
Well, congratulations.
But it's really just a credit to the great collaborators and the great community, the folks like Marina Moore and Trishant Kukusamy, who were PhD students of mine, and Andre Weimerskirch, Ira, and just an enormous number of other people in the community have really come together to make Optane and make this work very successful.
Well, congratulations. Your efforts deserve being rewarded. I think that we've gotten a cautionary tale from you in looking at how vulnerable we are as a nation and as individuals to something like this happening. And certainly, I think people will stay tuned to more efforts, and it's optane.org to get more information. Justin, I want to thank you very, very much for joining us. Just excellent, excellent information. I think a lot of people are going to be thinking long and hard about this, and I dare say that this is something that needs to be on the radar screen of our elected officials, and the fact that it came about as a result of a government effort is noteworthy. And so thank you very much, and thank you for your work that you're doing to help protect us, Justin.
Well, thank you for helping to get the word out. Appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. And we thank you very much for joining us. We've got another webinar next week. We've got webinars that's happening all the time, so you can go to our website to check them out. I will be talking about travel on Long Island next week, Wednesday at 10 a.m., so tune in. I want to thank, as usual, my main man, Alex Slatke, data guru and technical person that's been running the show, Shawnee Jarvis who prepares the graphics for our invitations that go out. And we want to thank you for tuning in and viewing. Hope that you were able to gain some valuable information today. You know, I certainly did, and I think this is something we all need to be thinking about going forward. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.